The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the bonus show. We have news about Chelsea Manning. Chelsea Manning, the former Army intelligence analyst who was convicted at the time as Bradley Manning of disclosing classified information to WikiLeaks, was ultimately released early from prison as a result of President Obama's action near the end of his presidency. She is now running for the U.S. Senate seat in Maryland, and she has put out a campaign video. And I'm terrible at predicting election results, but I think Chelsea Manning has absolutely no chance of becoming the next senator from Maryland. I don't know. Do you have an instinct on this already?
I mean, she's not the incumbent, so you can't make her the favorite. That's for certain.
Yeah.
She's probably a long shot, but the difference between her and some other obscure candidates would be that she has name recognition.
Yes,
right?
she does. She definitely has more name recognition than, I mean, at one point, it was pretty significant name recognition, given how much was in the news about her trial and her disclosing documents to WikiLeaks, so on and so forth. The only problem is,
too.
Yes, indeed. The only problem, though, is that it's attention that was for doing things that a lot of the country thinks were really terrible things. So I don't know. I mean, I know any publicity is good publicity, sort of, but it's also not, under that logic, Roy Moore would have won, right? Because the publicity around horrible things that he did would have gotten him more votes. And if people disagree with what you did, and to be clear, I'm not drawing any analogy between what Roy Moore is accused of doing and what Chelsea Manning did, the idea that any publicity is good publicity, I don't know that it applies to elections necessarily.
Well, what she did was certainly polarizing among the American public. I mean, I'm sure if you interviewed half of people, you would find that they think that she's a hero,
Yes.
and the other half think that she's a traitor. But you're not dealing with the entire American public. You're dealing with just voters in Maryland. And in this first round, you're just dealing with Democratic primary voters.
Yes, indeed.
And I think out of Democrats, maybe even in Maryland, the majority of them would think that she is a hero for doing what she did.
Sure. What percentage would prefer her over the alternatives is the question, right?
Right.
But I think it is a very interesting candidacy. Her platform is kind of related to, I mean, I think generally we can say that it's about questioning institutions of power and the control and influence that they have over our lives, which does sort of connect with her mission in having released those documents to WikiLeaks, documents that were, of course, illegally taken based on the access she had to military intelligence databases. So there's some connection to the crime/activism that she participated in. So that might appeal to some people, I guess.
mean, if you take a look at her campaign ad, it has a lot to do with, maybe like campaign finance reform or releasing some of the racial tensions that's going on in the country.
Sure.
But one thing that won't help her, I think, is her tweet from just about a week ago that said F the police on like a police appreciation day.
Particularly in Maryland, right? I mean, where there has been a particularly escalated situation between police and protesters in Baltimore over the last few years. Yeah, I find this very interesting. I just don't think it's going to go too far. But listen, I thought Trump wasn't going to win, so who am I to predict elections? Good for her.
If she was running against like some true progressive champion like Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders, I would say that she has no shot. But she is running against Ben Cardin, who pretty much no one knows about. I mean, he's just this older corporate Democrat type who isn't going to rally the base.
But not unpopular in Maryland. I think he's generally well-liked in Maryland.
Yeah. I think that goes to the thing about people support their own
the power of
representatives.
incumbency. No, I get that.
She's a long shot.
It's a long shot, but it's interesting, and I'll tell you if anything else comes up with it. Donald Trump last week sort of surprised lawmakers when they met at the White House when he said that it might be something to look at to go back to a form of earmarks, where he said maybe that brings people together in our system right now. The way it is set up will never bring people together. Earmarks are these provisions that used to be allowed in bills where funds would go to specific recipients. So as you can imagine, it opens the door so significantly to quid pro quos because you can receive a campaign donation, and then you can actually earmark money in a bill, not just for an industry, not just in support of a particular project, but what was that? Did you hear that? That was a very odd noise.
Kitchen noise.
Was that a kitchen? Was that from upstairs? That was a very bizarre noise.
It sounded like a spoon hitting a plate.
It sounded like a spoon hitting a plate. That was so strange. I don't know where that came from, but let's hope someone's not about to fall through here from the kitchen upstairs.
We'd have it on camera.
Holding their lunch, yeah. The problem with earmarks is that it so easily lends itself to corruption. Now, I know that you might be hearing me say this, and you would say, hold on a second, David. You don't need earmarks to do the quid pro quos because you can get a donation from I don't know, an oil company in a particular state. And then you can have that lawmaker pass a bill that says the money will go to this industry in this state for companies that are doing some very particular activity. And there might only be one or two companies doing that. So even without naming the companies or the individuals, you kind of still can earmark money that will go to specific places. But still, being able to earmark money so specifically, for me, is just the height of the quid pro quo corruption door opening. And I think it's an absolute and total disaster.
Yeah, it's interesting how Trump proposed this idea during the DACA and immigration reform meetings that they had by saying, well, you guys used to get along so much better. I would see Republicans and Democrats having lunch together. And maybe one way to fix that, to get back to that, would be to bring back earmarks.
It's correlation versus causation.
The room laughed at him.
It's correlation versus causation, because there are endless reasons why Democrats and Republicans maybe at some previous point got along better. Trump could be part of that reason. Trump's presence, it's so outrageous that it has furthered the divide between Republicans who seem to be supporting their party leader to the extent that Trump is that, regardless of what he does, and Democrats who realize the insanity of it. But the bigger point I'm trying to make is just because you at one point had earmarks and it was perceived that Republicans and Democrats got along better, there's no evidence whatsoever that it was because of the earmarks that they were getting along better. Doesn't make any sense.
I mean, I think proponents would say, well, if you want a park in Maryland, then you have to support the bridge in Utah. Otherwise, there would be no incentive. I mean, I guess the better way to do it would be just have a groundswell of support for an infrastructure bill across the entire country, rather than attaching something like a bridge to, I don't know, some disclosed secret national defense spending authorization.
The problem is, that's one problem, right? Which is we need clean bills. We need bills where we are just, we're not pulling in all sorts of other stuff, pet projects and whatnot.
Pork.
But the pork, yes, indeed. The other problem is that even infrastructure spending, the way Trump wanted to do it or wants to do it, it's a total crony handout, and it's designed with all sorts of mechanisms, really specific mechanisms involving loans and repayment and contracts and all sorts of other stuff, that it is designed to actually be, it sounds like an infrastructure spending program, but it's really crony capitalist handouts to Trump's buddies in the construction industry. So you can't even say we can agree with Trump on infrastructure spending. Yeah, we can agree with him at the very high level on infrastructure spending, but as soon as we get to how exactly would he do it, it's absolutely disgusting.
And I think that this remark isn't what you would expect from the drain the swamp president
as well.
Course. And if you want people in Congress to get together and control like they used to, what you should probably do is have more strict campaign finance reform.
Indeed.
Because then these representatives don't have to adhere to their donors as much and can actually listen to the people.
Of course.
And when there is commonality on some sort of bill, some proposition, they can actually support it and get something done.
Instead of it depending on all this other nonsense that gets pulled into it. No question about it. Okay, let's talk a little bit about this story relating to Aziz Ansari, the comedian. I don't know how I feel about the entire controversy around this story, but to give you the background, as you probably know, there's been this huge groundswell of accusations, basically, I think it's fair to say exclusively against men for inappropriate sexual conduct, assault, harassment of mostly women, although with the Kevin Spacey circumstances, it actually was involving all men, as far as I recall. So Aziz Ansari was accused in an article by a woman who says that she met him and they were in touch. They met in person and danced one day, and then they stayed in touch via phone, and eventually they had a date and they went to dinner, and Aziz Ansari very abruptly called for the check at the end of dinner, and they went back to his place and they were having wine, and he started kissing her and he started touching her, and she wanted to sort of slow things down. I think, as she said, let's take it easy. And then it led to oral sex being performed. And then ultimately, Aziz Ansari called her an Uber and she left. And the next day she contacted him, I believe it was via text, and said, your behavior yesterday was inappropriate. And he responded, I'm paraphrasing, along the lines of, it appears as though I misread the signals that you sent, the situation, and I apologize for my actions. And this has blown up into two camps that are pretty much polarized. One saying that Aziz Ansari did something that is, I don't know if this is the right term, but as bad as what many of the others have done in terms of up to and including rape and sexual assault. And there has been an emboldened counter movement, which is saying this is why the Me Too movement is a problem, because you have real instances of sexual assault. And then you have this one where a woman basically said, let's slow it down. But at no point did she really indicate that she wanted to leave or she didn't want to be doing whatever she was doing with Aziz Ansari. And it's mudding up the waters, blah, 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 blah. Where I have a real problem commenting on this is as a heterosexual man in Western society in the United States, I've never even come close to being in a situation where I was even remotely concerned that I might be in a coercive situation the way that many women in the United States have claimed to do. So I could read the story and I could give my thoughts and I could say, I think Aziz Ansari did do something wrong. Or I could say, you know what? I don't think he did anything wrong because she didn't really indicate that she didn't want to be there. And then it would be completely legitimate for a woman to come to me and say, David, you don't understand, just because she wasn't physically forced to do anything, the atmosphere in the room could have been one where she felt as though he might have become very angry and there would have been repercussions if she just tried to leave. I don't know what that's like. I've never experienced that. So I feel like my ability to really comment on the merits of this woman's story is limited, right? What I can say comfortably is I do believe there is a spectrum of incidents in terms of seriousness and aggression. I don't think this is anywhere near the top of the list in terms of what we've heard of. Does that mean that Aziz Ansari did nothing wrong? No, I really can't say that. I feel like I really can't. And this isn't, you know, I've talked about this problem of, for example, the Black Lives Matter events that don't allow or don't want to hear from white voices. And I think that's terribly counterproductive, right? We should all be working together. If there's white people who want to participate in the Black Lives Matter movement, they should be encouraged to do so because we really need consensus around that. This is not because I feel like as someone who is not a woman, I'm not allowed to, or it's not okay for me to express my opinion. I just generally have difficulty fully understanding what she might have felt like because I've never even come close to being in something remotely similar to this. What can I say? What can I add?
And that was very, very well said. I mean, the thing I would add is that you're dealing with nonverbal cues, it seems like. I don't think she ever came out and said that she doesn't want to have sex so specifically,
She said, let's chill out for a second or something along those lines.
Right, and they were also exchanging oral sex too, so who really knows, I guess. And I think that is part of the problem, especially because when you're talking about sex, I mean, you have to deal with obviously consent, but you never really know if you can read the other person entirely.
Absolutely.
So you know, you can't rank this certainly with any of the other sexual misconduct allegations. I think it's in a league of its own. I don't think, you know, he should face any employment
repercussions
problems with this, but you know, I think it is troubling to some degree.
Yeah, I wish I could have a more defined view, but every time I start going in one direction or the other, I realize that I don't really know what I'm talking about because I've never come close to being in her situation in one of these circumstances. I hope and believe I've never put any woman in something approximating what she's describing, a situation like what she's describing. I genuinely don't know that I really have a perspective where I can say much or add anything.
I mean, it seems to me like it was a date that went wrong. And when she made it clear that she wanted to go home, she went home. I mean, he ordered her an Uber.
Right.
I don't
Which
know
is horrible. He should have called the Lyft. I mean, we know politically he should have called the Lyft for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if she should have went public with the story, though.
I don't know.
And then that's her call, I guess.
I really am very tentative about taking a strong opinion because I just don't think I can really say with certainty. So that's why I'll stop and encourage people in the audience to get in touch and let me know what you think.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.